So we'll move on to amended Stage 3 Drought Declaration. Joshua Hagmark.
Chair Keller, Commissioners, Joshua Hagmark, Water Resources Manager. And I'm going to be changing it up. I've been presenting monthly on the status of the drought, and this is a little different occasion. We're looking at changing our Stage 3 declaration. And so I have a few other items I want to highlight, including a lengthy discussion about the impacts of development and of additional regulations. So we will recap where we are with the current drought, talk about our water supply strategy going forward, and then we'll dig into the demand management strategy side, looking at both regulations and development, and in with our recommendation to Council. So basically the community, I think, was first aware that we were in the midst of some different conditions starting in early 2014. Certainly having a 2-year dry spell is pretty common in California, but the weather patterns were setting up to be something different, and we moved fairly quickly on this with declaring a Stage 1 in February of 2014, and then quickly to a Stage 2 several months later in May, and then a year later to a Stage 3 in May of 2015. Rainfall, as of April 15th, we received 52% of normal, and in essence, April 1st is really the end of our typical rainy season, so I expect that number pretty much to stay flat at around 50% of normal for Gibraltar. Cachuma, 61% of normal, and downtown Santa Barbara at 68%. There have been some anomalies in the past, which we will look at in the Water Resources Manager's report, but they're an abnormal rainfall in April, but we're not expecting any game changers. There may be some half-inch events that will certainly help out with evaporative losses, but certainly isn't going to change the water supply discussion. This is a recent photo from the intake tower. That's about a 100-plus foot tower that diverts water to the south coast. And as you can see, it's now surrounded by a prospering meadow. And we are, it's essential right now. The barge is moving water, pumping water out of the lake and being able to move it to this critical facility. And here's another picture, almost 180 degrees from the tower, standing near the barge. Where I took this photo, I should be under about 60 feet of water. That the barge is at, it's about 90 feet below spill level. And as you can see, the barge is creeping closely to the shore, and that's why it was so critical that we get the barge moved. And things are moving forward with that, and the barge should be relocated by mid-June. This graphic here may be hard to see, but I want to focus here on this now has been the driest 5 years on record. This is for Gibraltar. It's taken from the county's website. This is almost 12 inches drier than the former drought of record, which was the 1947 to 51. That was the basis of our long-term water supply plan, and which we, at the time, added a year onto that as part of we took that drought, and then we added a year to it to create our long-term water supply plan. This drought has been almost 12 inches drier than that, and we get to see when the end of this drought will be. And then you can take a look at what an average 5-year span, we would have seen 132 inches of rain. So it's less than half of what we would have seen in 5 years. Despite all the media hoopla about the rainfall and in Northern California, the drought continues to play a pretty significant role statewide. And there's a lot of groundwater basins that need to recover. Yes, it's good to see the reservoir water coming into the reservoirs, but there's a long-term water supply issue in California, and most of Southern California and Central Valley did not prosper from any of the rainfall in Northern California. Wanted to include here, this is a graphic going back to the 80s showing water usage, and what I wanted to kind of point out here is During the 80s, when the community was much smaller, we were using about a little over 16,000 acre-feet of water a year. As a result of the drought, 87 to 92 drought, there was significant reductions in water usage. It brought the community at that time down just below 10,000 acre-feet. And then gradually after the drought was over, water usage returned, but never ever returned to that 16,000 acre-feet. It seemed to kind of stabilize more in the 14,000 acre-foot range. And here we are today. Again, no significant regulations, and our community is achieving nearly the same goal. And I think that's important. There are certainly tools that we could implement, regulations and additional restrictions. But this community, which has grown by about 5,000 residents since the last drought, is already approaching that same level, which was here was considered catastrophic. I mean, there was no outdoor watering when we were at this point, and we have yet to even touch that point. We've asked people to water in the evenings, but we've gotten to this point voluntarily, really, with a community that's been on board with it. And I think that's been very important with our current messaging and the communication that we have out there. So our supply strategy is moving to a 35% conservation. The community is basically, it's reflecting what the community is doing now. We are in year 5 here. We are utilizing imported water, which is critical. We do have some state water allocation that we received. Significant amount of groundwater. We believe this is the peak groundwater year. We think after this year, groundwater production is going to begin diminishing. And then we have what's remaining in Kachuma. This is water we were able to carry forward because of conservation in the community, and that's really important. This is water that we've been able to preserve because the community has been able to save, and that's what's helping to make up this year's supplies. When we look to next year, we do currently have adequate supplies to meet demand. You'll notice desal starts to play a significant role and helping us to meet those demands along with conservation. We have and will be importing water. The challenge with that imported water is we only have a certain capacity to import that water, and I'll be talking about that a little later and the impacts of that. It's not as if we could keep buying more water and somehow that's going to benefit our community. And then you'll see the diminished groundwater there. So what we've been focused on this year in our search for purchasing water is for 2018. How will we make up that shortfall? And I'll talk briefly about it, but I feel like we have a plan to make up for that shortfall. And this is under conditions, assuming continued drought conditions.
Oh, I had a question on that one.
Mm-hmm.
In year 6, I think it was, there's the desal component. Are we going to try to maximize the use of that, or is that, it looks like that section is a little bit smaller than what we have projected for year 7.
Right, Commissioner Kilborn, we did make some changes to desal production in the event that the project, we don't have any indication that it'll be delayed, but we've been conservative, assuming that it might be delayed. We have adequate supplies for next year, and then what you see in year 7 is a full production. Right now, if you remember the calendar that we're looking at, this is based on water year. It goes October 1st through September 30th. Right now, desal is planned to come on in October, assuming there might be some challenges with that. At this time, we don't have any indication there will be any issue. Everything seems to be on schedule, but we've, for our planning purposes, have assumed that this would be delayed maybe till December, and this shows a little more conservative approach to this.
You might note that Carlsbad wound up coming on a couple months later than scheduled, so I think that sounds realistic.
Mm-hmm. March ended up being a significant month of conservation for the community, racking up 40% for March. Again, this is compared to the 2013 year. We did receive some rainfall in March, which I think helped people keep those irrigation systems off versus the 2013 year. But certainly this is what we're hoping for to see from the community as we kind of move into the summer months. Our cumulative average now is 34% since we declared a stage 3 last May. So our water supply strategy, looking forward, is to ensure adequate supplies to meet demands through 2018 and to delay the desal expansion decision for city use at least 1 year. And so to do that, that's why we're looking to purchase water out through 2018 and have that lined up. Our tools are supply management and importing water to some extent, and then demand management through conservation. So I can report that one of the challenges with the state water system is the city has bought in and has a capacity of 3,300 acre feet a year. So we know we can convey that level of water to the community. It's about 30% of our demand right now. But certainly, if there's additional available capacity, we can increase those. But with that, we're struggling with the evaporative losses on Lake Cachuma. At this point, when you put water into that lake, we're anticipating a 20 to 30% loss in that water if it's in the lake due to evaporation and system losses in the delivery. So it's pretty significant. And so you have to take that into consideration when you think, okay, I imported 3,300 acre feet and I'm going to lose 30% of that to evaporation. So those are some of the challenges that we're facing.
This assumes that a pipe does not get installed to bypass the lake with the imported water?
That's correct. This assumes continuing to use the lake as a conveyance system. So right now we are finalizing a water purchase agreement with the Antelope Valley East Kern Water Agency. They are another state water contractor. They have a significant state water allocation, and they do not utilize that full allocation and are interested in leasing us that water. Right now the agreement is for 4,000 acre feet at $250 an acre foot, which we felt was a very fair price going into this year. That's roughly about $1 million. And we were also able to negotiate a unique return water agreement in which for every acre foot, every 2 acre foot we borrow, we only have to return 1. This is pending DWR's approval. We don't sense that they would reject that, but part of all state water contract exchanges have had this return component, and I think we've taken it into new territory asking for unbalanced the other way. We do have 10 years to return this water, and this water is already south of Delta and sitting in San Luis Reservoir, so there's no additional losses related to conveyance of the system.
What's our current balance that we have to pay back right now?
Our current balance is just over 5,000 acre feet, so this will add another 2 to that.
I'm just curious. When we're paying that back in the future, how's that get paid back?
Commissioner Davis, there are several ways to pay that back. One is with our state Table A allocation. The other is to actually purchase water from north of the Delta and use that water to return. And then we also have water in a groundwater bank that we've been unable to get it out of that we potentially could do in exchange of that water.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Ms. Bernie.
When we met last, there was some uncertainty about state water allocations and exactly what that would mean for us purchasing water north of the Delta. Can you just give us an update?
Commissioner Bernie, the north of Delta water, the pumps right now that move water, in particular Table A water, our state water allocation, are fully utilized right now based on the current 45% allocation. And because of environmental constraints having to do with the habitat up there, they are unable to move any additional water through the Delta. That was our first priority, was to try and go after that water, but given the inability to move additional water, we went with a much safer option where we knew we'd get the water. Again, we'll be looking at that in future years. The challenge is Northern California got a lot of water, but the pumps that actually move this water south are located in the southern part of the delta, which, when they are on, reverses the flow of the San Joaquin River. And the flow from that river they did not get as much rainfall, and so they do not have those flushing flows. And so it basically causes adverse environmental impacts, and so they're unable to fully utilize that pumping station. This brings us to the demand management side and our recommendation today, which is to move to a 35% conservation. And again, this is matching. I wouldn't say we're asking the community to do more. We're asking the community to continue to do what they're doing and match their conservation efforts. This just for because we will be getting in and talking about quantities of water per year. This represents about 5,000 acre-feet of savings, the 35% conservation. And at this time, we're not recommending any additional regulations.
Just quick question. Recognizing the community is already doing it, but we're also, let's just say it goes out for the additional 2 years and then some. What are our, again, just for sake of the record, what are our contingencies at that point if, in fact, people can't get there or don't get there?
The conservation target?
Yeah.
We have a long list of regulations, and we'll go into those, but basically reducing outdoor watering, limiting more outdoor watering is really where we believe we could get more savings. One of the things when we look at this, the cost of the drought is expensive, and the proposed rates for FY17 would be increasing the water fund revenue by about 20% to cover the costs, and so that inherently will have some element of conservation to it as well.
Good. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, so on that recommendation you're going to make, that's going to cost the customer something because you still have to recoup expenses with selling me less water now. So have you also compared that against increasing desal and selling me desal water? And is this a less expensive alternative than increasing the capacity of desal and selling me that water?
We have looked at it. Certainly, to an extent, the conservation is cheaper. But as we get into, should we have to make deeper cuts, I think desal will start to play a much more interesting role in that. The added costs of desal is pretty significant, and that's the challenge right now. Is you have low water use, and then you want to add on to it a pretty significant jump in costs.
So I actually think the added cost of conservation has been pretty significant too. So
yes.
Both in dollars and results. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I guess I'll ask some more questions I'll continue to press on that because when you say, those look like they're running down separate tracks to me necessarily. When you look at the color bars and you get out in the out years, you're way under capacity for production, but you're also asking me to increase my conservation, a customer to increase your conservation. And so you have a mechanism to increase capacity, and it's not clear to me what that costs. But I also know there's going to be another ramp up in costs of increasing my conservation, and I'd sure like to know that both of those are being looked at the same time in the same place for what's a decision as to a customer from a dollar standpoint.
I think Commissioner Jordan, one of the challenges when we certainly will be revisiting this expansion of desal again, which is. You make that investment, you go down that road, it doesn't mean that people are going to use more water, and therefore kind of it could exacerbate the problem. And so it's kind of that challenge. If you expanded the facility and you knew people were going to use more, then it would pay for itself, and you probably could make the business case for it. But that, unfortunately, the two aren't mutually exclusive. So let's talk a little bit about what triggers and demand reduction targets. So what if we don't meet, and I think that was the question that already had come up, is what if we don't meet the target? Or what if there are other challenges that come up? So interruption in supplies. Certainly we're aware there could be interruptions to state water deliveries. That's something that we currently are trying to manage a surplus in Kachuma to weather at least a 1 month outage. But that is certainly something where we may return to the community for a request for a temporary reduction in demand until we know that water supply is back up. Also, shortages. One of the things that we're foreseeing potentially next year is conveyance capacity limitations, where we won't be going into the summer with any Kachuma water, potentially, if we don't see any runoff. And so all we would have is the state water imports and what we could build up in the lake. And so one of the challenge next year is literally not, we may have plenty of water, but during those peak months of July, August, and September, we may not be able to get it to this community all at the same time. We may be looking for a several week or several month additional requests for reductions, and so therefore maybe some additional temporary regulations for a key period of time. So those are some of the things that we are currently contemplating potentially for next year as we further move through this uncharted territory. And then, of course, if at this point the state is they have adopted regulations through October, basically no significant changes. We continue to far exceed what the state is requiring of us.
Just a comment. It was just ironic driving here, listening to NPR. There was a piece on water agencies, both in the Sacramento area as well as the San Diego area, wanting to basically, one, release from state review of these goals, two, to self-certify that they're out of the drought. And so there is at least this other messaging that's going to be happening now in the press that we're out of the drought. And it won't, obviously will kind of confuse people within the state as to what's going on.
Chair Keller, Commissioner Davis, that is one of the challenges with Northern California receiving an average year of rainfall, is now we have a state that's kind of split. We have the haves and the have-nots, and it does make the state board's decisions moving forward rather difficult. Mm-hmm. So when we went through, we did look at what some of these additional regulations, particularly focusing on outdoor watering, for the most significant savings. And we did our best estimate as to what kind of savings we could get from those. So we looked at prohibiting lawn watering. We had, with limited exceptions, there may be public spaces, there may be event spaces where we may want to park, schools where we may want to waive that. But between 600 and 1,000 acre feet a year is what we potentially could get from a lawn watering prohibition. Prohibiting, ratcheting up the regulations, prohibiting outdoor water use except for hand watering of trees and shrubs, which I believe is where they were in the 90s, and that was a difficult discussion with the community. We believe that the savings from that is somewhere between 1,200 and 1,600 acre feet a year. And then an outright prohibition on outdoor watering was somewhere between 1,600 and 2,000 acre feet a year. Again, these are just meant to kind of give general estimates for what we might expect if we were to implement regulations.
Yeah, there was one other thing we did at that period of time, and that was we did a water lottery on new development. We had a water allocation for new development, and we limited new development to only a certain amount of acre feet a year and gave that out by some type of lottery. Mm-hmm. So we actually did a development control on top of even these for any new development.
So presumably outdoor watering would be able to continue to be done using gray water. So we may see if we get to that severe situation, a real ramp up in people using gray water systems.
And just pointing out again, I know I said this earlier, but during the last drought, we were prohibiting outdoor watering, and we're already basically to that same threshold in our community as far as water usage. So a lot has changed with how this community perceives water and how they use water. We're much more effective. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Allison DeBusk to talk about the water demand side of it related to development. And again, at this time, we're not recommending any changes to development, but I think this is going to be a community discussion. We're looking for feedback and input to take to City Council. This will be discussed next week with City Council, and looking for some direction, policy input.
Thank you. Allison DeBusk, Project Planner with the Community Development Department. And so I'm going to be talking about potential development restrictions. I'd like to start by looking at the water demand that we estimate from new development. In terms of what the city's general plan has estimated would be the annual water use per year, that was estimated at 40 acre feet per year based on the general plan's 20-year build-out growth scenario. We also looked at the amount of water demand that we've actually seen go online from 2004 to 2013, and that was based on certificates of occupancy that were granted for new structures, and that came to 28 acre feet per year over that 10-year period. As was mentioned previously, we also looked at the last 2 years, and in 2014 we had 38.54 acre feet go online, and in 2015 we had 9.74 acre feet go online. So what we have seen is that there are major discrepancies year to year in terms of how much water demand we see go online, but in terms of the average, we feel that the 28 acre feet per year is a pretty good average. It encompassed some boom development times as well as the recession, and seems to be fairly consistent. So using that 28 acre feet per year to a 40 acre foot per year estimate, that results in approximately 0.3 to 0.4% of the city's drought water demand estimate, so of 9,800 acre feet per year. So the primary drought-related development restrictions that we've been looking at are a landscape deferral, whether that be voluntary or mandatory. We've looked at a suspension of permits for new pools, and also suspension of permits for projects with net new water use. First, to look at potential savings from a landscape deferral, we estimate that that would be approximately 4.44 acre feet per year, which represents 0.05% of our annual drought water demand. So it is a relatively small amount. And getting to these estimates, it was a lot of assumptions that staff made. There is a portion of a landscape plan that's actually required now because of our stormwater management program. And so we think that the savings from most projects are going to be very, very minimal. Residential projects would be the projects that have the most potential for savings, but the mixed use and the non-residential projects probably have very little opportunity. So they don't have purely aesthetic landscaping. Most of their landscaping is required either for stormwater or for some other type of environmental mitigation. In terms of a potential suspension on the issuance of building permits for new pools, we issue permits for about 14 new pools every year. And, these pools have to be filled initially, and then they require annual maintenance. So as a whole, we estimate that that results in, an average of 1.2 acre feet per year, which is 0.01% of the annual drought water demand. So what this now is talking about potential restrictions on development, so new development, redevelopment, and we think this has the potential to be a much more significant tool than a ban on pools or new landscaping. So generally, a restriction on new development would be a restriction on projects with net new water use. So generally, that would be new residential units and or new commercial square footage. It would not include additions to single-family homes or even multifamily units as long as you weren't adding a new unit. So just to be clear on what types of things we're looking at as a potential restriction. So looking at the grand picture, everything that is currently in our pipeline, we have approved 69.64 acre feet of potential water demand, and we have 97.5 acre feet of pending but not approved development. So this is a total of 167.14 acre feet. And I have the numbers from 2014 in there just to show you a comparison and to show that, in general, these numbers are trending up. We have seen an uptick in new applications and new development. So we're looking at about 33.66 acre feet more that's in the pipeline now than was in the pipeline last year when we discussed development restrictions. We also have projects that we've already issued building permits for, and that's what the public sees as the new development because that's the more visual aspect of it. So we've issued permits for a total of 75.32 acre feet of new water demand per year. So looking at the grand total of what our cumulative impact from development could be, combining building permits, approved projects, and pending projects, it's 242.46 acre feet per year, and that represents approximately 2.5% of the annual drought water supply. If we were to implement a restriction on development, it would not affect the building permits that have already been issued. That water demand is already under construction, and it's not something that we can take back. So we would really be looking at that worst case scenario of another 167 acre feet per year from the approved and pending development. Also, just to be clear, that 167 acre feet, that's projects that some of those projects have been in our system for 10 years. So they may not all come to fruition, but that's why we consider it a worst case scenario, is because it includes all of those projects. And this is a graph that Joshua had also shown you previously, just to compare our last significant drought in the 90s to where we are today. The last drought, as you can see, the city's population, or the pending and approved development, was significantly higher than what we have now. It was over 600 acre feet per year, and right now we're looking at 167 acre feet per year. And also the city's water demand was much higher. It was in the 16,000 range versus the 14,000 range that is the city's pre-drought demand. So then just to give you a summary of the potential savings, a voluntary landscape deferral, we don't know that we would get much at all. It's hard to make that estimate. But if we had a mandatory landscape deferral, we think it would be approximately 0.05% of the supply. Suspension on new pools, 0.01%, and suspension of permits for development, 0.29 to 0.41% of the drought water supply. So,
are there any questions on that before we move on to the recommendation?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much. It's not really a question. It was just a comment. Earlier, I talked about 800 acre feet. That was from that development report that went to the council on all of the potential development in the AUD and everything else which is going on. There is at least this potential for a very large cohort of or slug of development coming through the process beyond just 1 or 2 years. Which the council will be struggling with, I know, in the planning commission in the next couple of months. So I was really talking about this anomaly that I think we're seeing right now. And just one other observation from the previous drought, that when you start talking about development regulations, that ticks up because people try to get in on before you institute any kind of regulations. So just, we'll all be sensitive to that in that regard. Thank you.
Mr. Jordan?
So Allison, I'm having trouble reconciling your earlier slides with your last slide. So the 40 acre-feet per year number is the general plan EAR projection, right?
Correct.
And by any measure right now, this year, we're like 4 times ahead of that, right?
Well, no, actually, we feel like we're pretty much in line with that, because what I was showing you was, the 167 is everything in the pipeline. So that's if it were all to get a building permit right now and be constructed right now.
Okay.
But the way the process really works is those projects get metered out.
Okay.
It takes them a while to get through. And in terms of what we've seen actually come online each year, it's...
So the other number, though, was 70 acre-feet approved this year.
You mean the 75 of building permits
Yeah,
issued
the
this year?
69.64 acre-feet a year in 2015 approved, no building permit issued,
Correct.
right? So we're time and a half plus ahead fiscal year or calendar year?
These are calendar year.
Okay, so 4 months into 1 year, we're already...
Well, these weren't projects that were just approved in the last 4 months. These are all projects that have been approved since 1990 and are still on the books. So
Okay.
we don't have a number of what's been
All right,
approved.
so
in
there's
just
that
the last
issue
4
of going
months.
backwards in time and banking and that kind of stuff. It's not a.
We're
it's not
looking
a,
at everything
It's not
that's
really
there.
a calendar 4-month year number. It
Correct.
represents the past also.
Correct. It's what we
Okay.
have at this moment in time.
All right.
Total.
Well, that's why you sit out there and get queried in public then. All right, thank you.
So in summary, our water supply situation has not improved. We are in unprecedented drought condition. We are working to secure and preserve water supplies and promote extraordinary water conservation, increasing the citywide demand reduction target to 35%, matching the current community's conservation. And as part of the recommendation that Council adopt a resolution amending Resolution 15036, the Stage 3 Drought Emergency Declaration, to increase the conservation target from 25 to 35% of the 2013 water usage. At this point, we'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Before I answer more questions from the commission, I might note that the issues that we've been discussing regarding development and water coming online is not included in the recommendation. It's included in the background information that's been described, but the recommendation is much simpler than that, only recommending that we change the percent figure of the conservation. With that, any further comments or questions? Mr. Jordan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, I think I'm going to talk about the desal on the next item too, but so the action you're taking to council because of the catch-up we play will prompt, and if it's approved, would prompt another rate increase subsequently also, eventually, right?
What's that?
Well, we're going to increase our conservation. You're going to get less revenue. You're going to play catch-up, and there'll be another rate increase, correct?
The rates that we are currently proposing for adoption include 35%
Okay.
conservation.
All right, and then we can continue to discuss the role of desal and which one's the better mitigation for the customer, right? Okay, thank you.
I actually was just going to make a motion to support the recommendation of the amendment to the resolution.
So that's a motion for the recommendation as stated right there.
Sir.
Any other discussion or?
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. Mr. Kilborn? In that case, I will call for a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Carried unanimously. Thank you. And that brings us to